So yes, because of a series of events they didn't expect to happen, there was the opportunity of the Brexit vote. And within the first hour of that Brexit result being announced, I was sitting here in the same chair. I wrote on the internet, this is just the start, because the political class and the European dark suits who've never seen a ballot box in their life are not going to let this go quietly or easily. And now we're seeing this coalition between the political class in Britain that don't want us to leave the European Union despite the referendum, and the dark suit class in Brussels that wants the same outcome, who are making it more and more and more difficult. And now we're coming to exactly what I said would happen, the pressure for a second referendum to overturn it. This whole European Union is something that goes back at least to the 1920s. It goes back to the Warburg banking family. It goes back to the aristocracy families of Europe, like Otto von Habsburg. This whole idea of creating a European centralized dictatorship to dictate from a central point to the entirety of Europe.
Or indeed creating something, and we don't have time. We did go into this on the podcast, but it's my fault for starting it. But all I can say is that, looked at another way, there are those who would say that it stopped us from having more conflict, it's helped us to see the other person's point of view, and it's oiled the wheels of trade. Two ways to look at everything. You're hearing the views of David Icke. Got to take that break now here on Talk Radio, The Unexplained with Howard Hughes. Back in a sec. David Icke has a book out at the moment, and he also is going on a big speaking tour. Dublin next week, like we said, and virtually everywhere else. But I'll give you the address of David's website at the back end of this. We won't trouble ourselves with that now. So, David, you've been very good and said that you're going to try and tackle some of these questions that I've had in. Now, look, when I asked for questions on Twitter before we started doing this, recording this, obviously we got quite a lot of stuff, like one saying, was Mr. Spoon and the Soup Dragon based on true events, and is the moon really made of cheese? Which is one. Is David Icke mad? Is another one. So you get, and like I was saying at the top of this,
they're idiots, man.
Well,
they're idiots.
One third of the question.
Idiots.
Well, yeah,
they haven't got two brain cells to rub together, and they have absolutely no self-respect.
Well, no, they would
ask stupid questions like that.
Well, they would think
in their intelligent people.
Well, I know they would think that they have a sense of humour. I think a lot of people would disagree with that. But the point that I'm making with that,
freedom of speech.
Well, yeah, there's your freedom of speech for you. But hold on.
I defend their right to say it, but they're idiots.
Hold on. Well, okay, that's you said that, and that's fine. But what I'm illustrating here,
that's what freedom of speech is about.
Is that if I'd done that, if we'd had Twitter, if we'd had Facebook, if we'd had social media, for good, bad, or indifferent, 20 years ago, and we were able to do that and ask for questions, then we'd have got a lot more frivolous questions like, "Are you mad?" Than we got tonight. 2/3 of the questions actually make a lot of sense. So let's get into them. Let's start here then. Do you think, David, still that global warming is a hoax as the sea ice disappears in the Arctic and billions of gallons of melted ice pour off Greenland along with the melting permafrost all over Siberia and Alaska, releasing methane, says Michael. He has a point, doesn't he?
Well, the answer to that question is yes, I do. But to respond to it in any credible way would take a long, long time. But there's a book just come out, which I've been reading recently. Basically, it's called The Politically Incorrect Guide to Global Warming or Climate Change. I do recommend that people read that because with enormous detail, it takes the whole thing apart. But yes, I do believe that, absolutely.
Okay, and despite the fact that we've had research released in this last week saying that temperatures are going to, we've had a little bit of a blip, but temperatures are going to inexorably rise in the coming years. We're going to have a hot period.
Howard, in the 1970s, they were saying we were going into a global cooling. We've had scandal after scandal of revelations of the climate data being manipulated. We've had climate models, which basically, what's a computer model? You put crap in, you get crap out, right? So we've had it over and over and over and over
My
again.
scientific friends would call that research. Derek asks...
Yes, and they'd be wrong. If you don't put accurate information in, you don't get an accurate outcome out. And they've been proved wrong again and again and again with what's happened since the turn of the millennium. What they said was happened. It's not happened at all in terms of temperature rise.
I hear what you say, even in the light of a massively hot summer with temperatures up to 38 degrees in the southeast of England and potentially more hot weather to come. But let's park that there.
So what happened in 1976 when we had that fantastic summer, and they're still talking about global cooling? What was about in 1959 when we had a fantastically hot summer? You know, the temperatures were hotter during the medieval warm period, about 1,000 years ago. Well, I mean, what caused that? Turbocharged handcarts? I mean, do the research. That's what I say to people. This is the whole thing about what we were talking earlier, Howard. Let's put into the public arena what the scientists, the mainstream scientists say, the song sheet scientists, as I call them, and let's put into the public arena what increasing numbers of other scientists are saying, which actually doesn't make sense. And then people can make their own mind up. But when you have people like the BBC saying some years ago, the science is now settled, so we're not going to have people on questioning it anymore, then you are going down a very, this dark road that I'm talking about.
You do hear people on questioning it. I've had somebody on here only very recently questioning it. But we have to say that there are more people accepting what scientists around the world are saying. There is a famous scientist in Texas who I had on this show who talks about the weirding of our weather increasingly. You know, there are more of those people than people putting the other view. But let's go to something else. There are people, and you must have come...
How do you know that? How do you know that when these other scientists don't get the ability to have their voices heard?
Well, they have access to all the same platforms that you have access to, don't they?
Well, they don't have access to the mainstream media where most people get their information from. They don't.
Okay, let's move to something else.
You know,
a lot of people...
You say you've interviewed someone, but I mean, you're not the BBC 10 o'clock news, are you? You're not Newsnight. It's these really mainstream of mainstream...
I'm very pleased we're not. I wear that as a badge of honour, David Icke. Now, look, let's move on to something else, because I've got loads of questions here, and I want to get to, a measure of them. Derek asks, and one of the problems is that when you go into the fields that you've been into over the years, people think that you are a repository of knowledge about all things. But I'm going to ask it anyway, because it's a question that's worth asking, whatever. Derek asks, can you ask David Icke, what was the Great Pyramid of Giza's true purpose? Now, you know, there's a lot of talk about that. There's been a lot of research recently. They discovered a new bit of it, a new chamber of it. It may be some kind of power generator. They don't quite know, but they're trying to find out. Have you ever had any thoughts about that?
Well, yeah, I mean, I've talked to quite a few people over the years who've done a lot of research into that whole Giza pyramid and what it was really there for. I've been inside it. The idea that it was built as a burial chamber is ludicrous, to go to those lengths for a burial chamber for one pharaoh. I mean, it's just crazy. But what I found interesting recently is that there was some scientific study came out pointing out the extraordinary electromagnetic properties inside the pyramid, particularly because of the way it's structured inside. And this would absolutely fit with what a number of people I've spoken to over the years who've really gone into this in great detail. They believe it was some kind of power generator, so some kind of, if you like, transformer that could take atmospheric energy from the electromagnetic field of the planet and turn it into some kind of usable power.
Or indeed a giant battery is what they've been saying recently.
Yeah, that's something like that and more is what I would go down. Because you see, this is the point about history, is that people believe that, because this is what's pounded out all the time, is that the human race in its knowledge has only ever gone forward. It's never been at a high level and then fallen from that level. And I say to people today, if something happened, if there was some catastrophe happened, that meant we no longer had electricity or oil, what kind of society will we live in very, very, very quickly? Nothing like the one we live in now. And it's very clear when you do study history that there have been periods when there's been very great knowledge, and that knowledge has then been lost. Therefore, in some of these ancient societies where they built structures that we would struggle to build today, and scientists and historians and all these people look at them and say, how did they do that? How did they move these stones of hundreds of tons and all the rest of it? I saw a place in just above Cusco in Peru. It's a very famous place. Sacsayhuaman is one way they pronounce it. And there are these enormous, absolutely enormous stones that are fitted together like a dry stone wall. You can get a cigarette paper between them. It's incredible.